Rick Dorsey returned home to his quiet street on Saturday night. He unloaded his garment bag, briefcase, and laptop, knowing his wife Nora wasn't there. After placing his items, he removed his jacket and tie and changed into casual clothes. Having just returned from a business meeting, Rick had told Nora he'd be gone through the weekend to avoid suspicion. He relaxed with a meal of Nora's leftovers and a beer, appearing as a typical husband unwinding after a trip. Rick was actually following a planned script to handle his personal crisis. He had been dealing with grief and intended to address the remaining stages: anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance during the evening. After midnight, Rick felt ready to proceed. He tidied up the kitchen, cleaned the table, and put his dishes in the dishwasher to delay and grapple with second thoughts. Once done, he grabbed a light jacket, sent a final email, and left the house. He drove away as the garage door closed behind him. At 7:37 a.m., a 911 operator in Sharpsburg answered a call. A young woman speaking from a payphone reported, "I think I need the police. I think a crime has been committed." The operator asked for her location. The woman responded, "I'm on Park Drive, the payphone beside George Washington Park." The operator inquired about the nature of the crime and if she had been attacked or robbed. The young woman on the phone said, "I'm fine, but there's a car at a picnic site in the park with its doors open, the light on, and there's a lot of blood." The 911 operator asked if an ambulance was needed. She replied, "No, there's no one there that I saw, just the car and the blood. I didn't check further because I was scared, so I ran to the payphone." The operator assured her that help was on the way and asked her to stay put to guide the officers. She responded anxiously, "I'm not waiting here. What if the person who did this comes after me? I'm going home." Then she hung up. The operator, seeing the call end, thought it might have been a prank and hoped it hadn't disrupted anything more urgent. Around 2 p.m. on Sunday, Detective Peter Raymond approached a car in the Dorsey driveway. As the driver, a short-haired blonde, got out, she introduced herself as Nora Dorsey. Detective Raymond, from Sharpsburg Police, informed her he was investigating her husband Rick, whose abandoned car was found in George Washington Park. He showed his ID before putting it away. Nora was confused, explaining Rick was in Pittsburgh and left his car at the airport during trips. Detective Raymond confirmed the car was Rick's by checking the license plate and VIN. Nora, now worried, suggested the car might have been stolen from the airport. She moved toward her home's side door as Detective Raymond asked when she last spoke to her husband and if she could call him, mentioning if he had a cell phone. Nora stopped and searched her purse for her cell phone to call Rick. Just then, Detective Raymond's phone rang. He answered, and Nora was surprised to hear Rick's phone on the line. The detective explained that Rick's phone was now evidence from a crime scene with blood, a bullet hole, and signs of a second shot. He stressed the need to locate Rick to determine his role and asked if she could call his hotel in Pittsburgh. Nora, now anxious, agreed to call the Holiday Inn where Rick stayed. She invited Detective Raymond inside while she made the call, assuming Rick had left his phone in the car. In the kitchen, Nora dialed the hotel, but after a brief conversation, she hung up, looking pale. She told Raymond that Rick was home as his briefcase and laptop were in the living room. She was confused. Detective Raymond then called for a search warrant to check the Dorsey residence and determine Rick's status. He requested it be expedited. Nora, distressed, questioned the need for a warrant and insisted Rick was not involved in anything illegal. She urged Raymond to find her husband, fearing he might be in danger. Raymond, understanding Nora's distress, explained he needed to follow legal procedures to ensure any evidence would be valid in court. He suggested she make coffee while they waited for the warrant and assured her that a search was underway. Nora, comforted by his sympathetic tone, started preparing coffee. However, her anxiety resurfaced when Raymond asked for details about how she had spent the last 48 hours, explaining that they would likely need statements from anyone involved. As they sat at the kitchen table, Raymond described the discovery of the car and its state. He recounted the blood-soaked passenger seat, a bullet hole, and evidence of a second bullet fired into a block of firewood near the car. The car had been towed for examination, and evidence was still being gathered, with a medical examiner and forensics team investigating the scene. Nora looked horrified by the details. Detective David Klein arrived earlier than expected with the search warrant, accompanied by 2 forensics technicians. They began a thorough search of the Dorsey home, garage, and Nora's car. Detective Raymond coordinated with Nora to find Rick's razor and toothbrush for DNA comparison with the blood evidence. Nora, overwhelmed by the situation, was taken to the living room to sit while Detective Raymond continued the search. After an hour of searching with little progress, the detectives decided to take Rick's briefcase and laptop. They found the laptop password protected and would need to bypass it to access its contents. Nora provided the old password, Rick 1971, but it did not work, indicating the password had been changed. Raymond assured her that forensic experts would bypass the password. With the laptop and other items tagged and removed for examination, Raymond turned to Nora for a preliminary statement. He needed details about her whereabouts from Saturday morning until she returned home that afternoon. Nora described her activities. She did housework until noon, received a call from Rick in Pittsburgh around 1 p.m., went shopping until 4:30 p.m., visited a friend in the evening, and returned home around 2 p.m. She became increasingly tense as she recounted her schedule, ending with her eyes on the floor and her hands wringing together. After noting Nora's explanation, Detective Raymond informed her that more detailed information might be required later. He then prepared to leave to join the search of the garage and Nora's car. Before departing, he requested recent full-body and headshot photographs of her husband, as they only had his driver's license photo. Nora quickly retrieved a photo album, and Raymond reviewed several pictures. He chose a group photo showing Rick with Nora and another man, as well as a good headshot. These photos would be useful for distribution among patrol officers. As Nora handed over the selected photos, Raymond inquired if the man in the group photo was a relative of Rick. He suggested that a DNA sample from a sibling or parent could be helpful if they couldn't obtain usable evidence from personal items. Nora quickly replied, "No, that's Clyde Moore. He's my husband's best friend since grade school. My husband doesn't have any relatives who live near here." Detective Raymond joined the team in the garage, leaving Nora looking distraught at the kitchen table. Her husband was missing, and her lack of knowledge about his whereabouts added to the detective's suspicions. The search revealed blood on the accelerator and brake pedals of Nora's car, prompting its tow for further analysis. As the technicians packed up, the detectives discussed Nora's situation. Raymond was unsure about her involvement, while his partner, who had only just arrived, found her reactions typical of a worried spouse but was also uncertain about her role. Raymond decided to check Nora's reaction to the news about the blood and the car being towed, asking his partner to join him. The two detectives approached the side door, knocked, and went inside. Nora Dorsey was on her cell phone, and she looked startled as the two men entered the kitchen. She quickly hung up without finishing her call and exclaimed, "You're back! I thought you were done here!" Peter Raymond moved to the side, giving his partner a clear view of Nora Dorsey. "We thought we were finished too, but the forensics team found what seems to be blood smears on both the brake pedal and accelerator of your car. We're taking your car to the impound for a thorough inspection. I hope that's okay." Nora looked truly surprised and responded, "Blood in my car? How did that get there? I didn't notice any blood at all." The detectives kept their eyes on her as one of them said, "We're trying to figure that out. We don't know yet if it's connected to the recent incident in the park, but if it matches the blood found there, we'll definitely need some answers. We also need the shoes you wore today. I haven't been to the park in weeks. I can't understand how there could be any blood in my car, especially not like what you described in my husband's car." While she spoke, she took off her shoes and handed them to Detective Raymond. After doing so, she slumped back in her chair, covered her face with her hands, and started to cry. Realizing there wasn't much more to be done without additional information, the detectives said their goodbyes, leaving her slumped in her kitchen chair. "What's your take, Dave? Do you think she's genuinely a worried wife, or could she be putting on an act? Did you see how she was on the phone when we walked in and then abruptly ended the call?" David Klein shook his head and replied, "Honestly, Pete, I'm not sure. She seems sincere, but you never know. If the blood in the car matches the husband's, there's a good chance she might be involved. We see that pattern often. It might be worth checking out their backgrounds, talking to friends and neighbors. Someone might have useful information. As for the phone call, she was probably chatting with a close friend. Women often turn to their best friends when things get tough." "Yeah, you're probably right. Some good old-fashioned digging might uncover something useful. I'd really like to find out why he arrived in town 2 days earlier than planned. That could be a key detail." When he reached his car, Detective Raymond took out a plastic evidence bag, placed the shoes inside, and sealed it securely. After arriving separately, Detectives Raymond and Klein returned to the station alone, reviewing clues but finding no new leads. They spent their shift on reports and paperwork, with no updates from the lab. The next morning, they were eager to continue but found a stack of forensic and medical examiner reports. After reviewing, they realized more information was still pending. Peter suggested waiting for additional reports before making conclusions, while David proposed checking computer analyses, contacting Dorsey lawyer, and speaking with his colleagues. By 9 a.m., they met with Rick Dorsey lawyer, Robert Graham, who confirmed the authenticity of several email messages from Dorsey Computer. The detectives thanked him and left. On their way to ABC Industrial, Peter noted that spouses are often involved in such cases, but more investigation was needed. At Rick Dorsey's workplace, they were promptly directed to his supervisor, where Detective Klein led the inquiry into Rick's abandoned car. Rick Dorsey's boss was eager to help, noting Rick was a valued employee who was not scheduled for weekend work and was expected back Friday night. He mentioned that Rick seemed stressed recently but had claimed everything was fine. The detectives thanked him and returned to their car, feeling optimistic as the case was starting to take shape. By late morning, they reviewed preliminary DNA results and a strange box with wires on a forensic report which, along with printed maps, added new clues. They spent a few hours in an interrogation room reviewing the information and decided it was time to question Nora Dorsey again. They arrived at her home just after 3, without calling ahead to avoid giving her a chance to prepare. Nora looked surprised when she answered the door. "Detectives, have you found my husband? I've been calling the desk sergeant every few hours, but he says there's nothing new." Detective Raymond replied, "No, we haven't found him yet, but we've made some progress. Can we come in and ask you a few questions?" Nora hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course, come in. I'll do anything to help find Rick." She led them to the living room and took a seat on the sofa, with the detectives sitting in chairs opposite her. Detective Klein opened his notebook and asked, "Can you tell us about your relationship with Clyde Moore?" The direct question was intended to unsettle her. Nora went pale and stammered, What do you mean? Clyde is just Rick's friend and mine too." Detective Raymond then asked, "Are you having an affair with Clyde Moore?" His tone was calm, and he waited for her response. Nora grew even paler, her mouth moving wordlessly before she said, "Absolutely not. How can you ask me that?" The detective stood up, and Detective Klein said, "You'll need to come to the station for an official statement." Nora, starting to panic, asked, "What? Am I under arrest? Why do I have to go?" "You're not under arrest yet. We think you might not be truthful, and we need a formal statement. You can request a lawyer if you want." Nora, looking distressed, quickly said, "I don't need a lawyer. I haven't done anything. I'll come to the station and do whatever it takes to help find Rick." She followed the detectives to their car, unaware of Pete giving Dave a thumbs up. After placing her in the back seat, the detectives drove silently to the station. Once there, they led Nora to an empty, stark interrogation room that needed a paint job and new furniture, aiming to create a negative environment. Detective Raymond said, "You'll wait here while we get our files. Are you sure you don't want a lawyer?" Nora shook her head, tears in her blue eyes. She sat heavily in a chair as Raymond left, closing the door behind him. "Make sure both cameras are recording the entire time. I want a complete record of everything," Detective Klein instructed his commanding officer. Peter Raymond arrived with the files and suggested, "Let's grab a coffee first and let her stew a bit." The 3 men agreed and spent the next 20 minutes discussing the case in the staff coffee room. Meanwhile, at Crime Stoppers, a volunteer answered the phone. "Good morning, this is Crime Stoppers. We pay up to $1,000 for tips on crimes. How can you help? This call is recorded." After a pause, the caller asked, "Is this where I can get money for helping the police?" "Well, that depends on what you tell us, the nature of the crime, and how much the police believe you helped solve it. Do you have any information about a crime?" After a brief pause, the caller responded, "So, I don't get any money now. I have to wait. What if the cops try to cheat me out of it? What happens then? We need to verify that you actually helped. The money isn't coming from the police, so there's no reason for them to cheat you. Just tell me what you know, and I'll give you a code number. You can call back in a few days, and I'll let you know if your information was useful and how much it's worth." The caller, sounding a bit annoyed, said, "I want some juice now. I need the money right now." "That's just how it works, sir." "What do you mean by juice? If you're homeless and need food, I can give you the addresses of some shelters that provide meals." "I don't need food. I need juice. You know, grape juice, the kind that costs $5 a bottle." The operator chuckled to herself but responded, "I'm afraid I can't help you with that right now. However, if your information is useful, you could probably buy a lot of grape juice." "All right, I'll wait. What I saw was someone throwing a colt into the river. I was under the 3rd Street Bridge on Sunday morning, or at least I think it was Sunday morning. A guy drove up to the public access lot, got out with a colt and 2 shovels, and tossed them into the river right in front of me. I was terrified. I thought for sure he'd see me and use that on me. The operator asked if the items were thrown off the east side of the 3rd Street Bridge parking lot. The caller confirmed and added that the items were dropped off a small dock, making them easy to locate. He also described the suspect as a big guy with light-colored hair and mentioned a dark blue car with a license plate starting with AZSS. The operator took note and gave the caller a tip number, 127, to call back in a few days for updates or a possible reward. The information was forwarded to the police, and within an hour, a diver retrieved the items, a Colt and shovels, from the river. The tool matched the caliber and ammunition of the recent crime at George Washington Park, confirmed by a test bullet. The shovels were collected for further examination, and the tool was sent to forensics. As the detectives and their commander left the staff coffee room, they were met by a clerk delivering the ballistics and Crime Stoppers reports. The clerk mentioned that the Crime Stoppers report might lead them to the perpetrator before leaving. Detectives Klein and Raymond reviewed the reports and checked vehicle registration records. Klein decided to question Nora Dorsey in the interrogation room, while Raymond, with a uniformed officer, would visit Clyde Moore for questioning. Klein took the reports and went to see Nora Dorsey, who was waiting calmly in the interrogation room. Raymond headed to Moore's residence with the officer for a surprise visit. She appeared to be waiting impassively for whatever was to come. "Sorry for the delay, Mrs. Dorsey. We're ready to begin now. Just so you know, this room is monitored by 2 cameras and everything we discuss will be recorded." Surprise flickered across her face as she responded, "I don't mind being recorded. I have nothing to hide." As he sorted through some documents, he said, "That's good to hear. Let's get started then." He glanced at her briefly before addressing her directly. "We'll pick up where we left off at your home. Again, are you having an affair with Clyde Moore? Please answer yes or no." Her shoulders drooped slightly and she looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with him. After a brief pause, she replied quietly, "Yes." Detective Klein pulled out a couple of sheets from the stack of papers in front of him. "I'm glad you chose to be honest. We have evidence of your affair right here, printed from your husband's laptop." Her reaction was one of surprise. Her head snapped up and she met his gaze with renewed intensity. "What do you mean, you have proof? Nobody knew about Clyde and me. Your husband was definitely aware, as you can see from these documents. Here's an email he sent his lawyer nearly a month ago, requesting that divorce papers be prepared on the grounds of infidelity. There's also a map from 2 weeks ago showing your route that day, complete with timestamps indicating you spent 2 hours at Clyde Moore's place. Additionally, there's a copy of an email your husband sent his lawyer that same day, in which he mentioned that you lied when you said you were at home that afternoon." One by one, the documents were pushed across the table, landing in front of Nora. She looked between the papers and the detective several times, picking them up to verify that they matched his descriptions. Finally, she asked, How did Rick find out? How could he know where I was? This map." She held up the detailed map, tracing the clearly ricked route from her home to her lover's. "I'm not sure how he discovered this initially, but he must have installed a tracking device in your car," Detective Klein explained. He presented a small black device about the size of a pack of cigarettes and pushed it toward her. It was labeled PT, -200, and had Rocky Mountain tracking engraved on it. He purchased this online with an unlimited tracking plan. Using his laptop, he could see your exact location in real time, with detailed addresses and timestamps. He could track where your car was every minute of every day since he put this device under your dashboard. Nora looked at the small, seemingly harmless device as if it were a venomous creature. "So, Rick knew about us for weeks? Oh, God. And he wanted a divorce?" She started crying again, prompting the detective to collect the papers and the tracking device, arranging them in a separate stack beside him. "He certainly did, including details on the time and place of all 4 of your meetings with his friend over the past month. The last map was made just after midnight, on Saturday night, the night he disappeared. This was around the same time he sent an email to his lawyer saying he planned to go to Moore's place to confront both of you. He was worried that he might get arrested if he broke into the house or ended up in a fight with your lover, who was supposed to be his friend." Looking at the detective, she said, "But he never came over there. I stayed the night at Clyde's, but Rick never showed up. Something must have happened to him before he reached Clyde's house." The detective was quick to respond. "Something did happen to him. Preliminary DNA tests show that the blood found in the park is his, and we've just recovered the Colt used in the incident. We can connect the tool to your lover. Now the only question is how long you plan to cover for him." "Clyde didn't do anything to Rick. I was with him the entire time and he never left that night, she said. Her gaze dropped away from the detective as she added, We were together all night in his bed. The detective pulled out more papers and said, There's more evidence. The blood found in your car and on your shoe also belongs to your husband. Right now, my partner is on his way to get Mr. Moore, and we'll soon find out if his story matches yours. Also, there's the issue of prosecutorial discretion. Whichever one of you reveals what really happened and where we can find your husband's body will likely get a better deal in court. He pushed the blood analysis reports toward her, but she barely looked at them. Rick isn't dead. He can't be dead. I love him. I need him, she cried, clearly distraught. Clyde will tell you the same things I have. If my husband was hurt in the park, we had nothing to do with it. She continued to cover her face with her hands, clutching a wrinkled and wet handkerchief in her left hand. Detective Klein gave Nora a few minutes to compose herself while he retrieved and selected additional reports meant to shock her further. As she seemed to regain her composure, he told her, There's no doubt your husband is dead. Based on the blood loss and lack of medical attention, the medical examiner estimates a greater than 95% chance that he's dead. He slid the report and photos of the bloody scene across the table. One photo touched her elbow, causing her to uncover her face and look at it. Overwhelmed by the graphic image, she resumed crying. Klein then organized his documents, picked up everything, and headed for the door. I'll leave you for a few minutes to compose yourself. You're not helping by avoiding your responsibility. Klein set the reports on his desk, shook his head at his commanding officer, and went to the break room for coffee. Meanwhile, the commanding officer monitored the interrogation room to ensure Nora's safety. As Detective Raymond left the station, he felt confident they had enough evidence to resolve the Rick Dorsey case soon. He wondered if Clyde Moore might have fled, concerned about the evidence against him. At the Moore residence, Raymond arrived with a backup patrol car. After exchanging pleasantries with the officers, they approached the door. Clyde Moore answered, looking curiously at the two strangers, one in uniform and the other with a badge. Raymond introduced himself and explained they needed Moore to come to the station for questioning about Rick Dorsey's disappearance. Moore, surprised, asked if he was under arrest and expressed confusion about how he could help since he knew little about Dorsey's case. Raymond reassured him that they just had some questions and he wasn't under arrest. Moore, stunned, agreed to come along. He sat in the back of the unricked car while Raymond and the uniformed officer sat in the front, following department protocol for backup. Raymond first arranged for a squad car to return his partner to his patrol car later. Then he asked Moore about his relationship with Mrs. Dorsey. Moore said he only knew her as Rick's wife and mentioned his landscaping business, Moore's Landscaping, which worked on commercial projects, including those for the city. At the police station, Moore was taken to an interrogation room next to Nora Dorsey's. He waited alone as Raymond went to retrieve files from Detective Klein's desk. The questioning of Moore mirrored that of Nora Dorsey. Initially denying an affair, Moore eventually admitted to a 4-month relationship with Nora after being confronted with emails and tracking reports. He denied any involvement in Rick Dorsey's disappearance and claimed neither he nor Nora left his home the night Rick vanished. As Detective Raymond pressed Moore on his involvement, Moore offered a new theory, suggesting that if Rick had discovered the affair, he might have reacted violently and even hired someone to frame Moore and Nora. Raymond dismissed Moore's theory, pointing out that they had the Colt used, a witness who described Moore and his car, and a partial license plate number linked to him. He warned Moore against fabricating elaborate stories about Rick Dorsey staging his own death to implicate him and Nora. Clyde Moore grew increasingly agitated as he said, You don't really know Rick. We've been best friends since grade school, but I've always known better than to mess around with his girlfriends, or now his wife. Back in high school, I made a mistake. I dated one of his girlfriends behind his back, and when he found out, he was so angry that he terrified me. Even though I'm bigger and stronger, his anger was intimidating. He warned me then that if it ever happened again, I'd be in serious trouble. The detective listened with a hint of amusement. So, you're saying you were actually afraid of what he might do if he found out, but you still went ahead and slept with his wife? That doesn't make much sense. Clyde, now more subdued, admitted, Yeah, it was dumb. I couldn't help myself. We had this thing building up between us for years, and I finally made a serious move a few months ago. We've been seeing each other regularly since then. I don't know how he could have found out. We were so careful. The detective flipped through his reports before responding. It was definitely a mistake. A lot of our self-endings are fueled by stupid decisions like this, the classic love triangle. But in this case, it seems pretty clear that you and Nora are the ones involved. You might as well tell us what really happened. Did he catch you off guard and things went wrong? Or was this planned from the start so you could be together without worrying about him finding out? The idea that he planned his own murder doesn't make sense. He already had his lawyer working on a divorce. Why would he suddenly choose to go this route? Clyde Moore insisted that neither he nor Nora was involved in Rick's disappearance, claiming their affair was over and had never been significant. Detective Raymond told Moore there was enough probable cause to search his house, car, and office. He advised Moore to confess to potentially get a lighter sentence, but warned that the situation could worsen. Moore angrily denied any involvement, suggesting Nora might be to blame, but claiming he didn't know what she did. Raymond left the room, noting that suspects often shift blame and hinting that Moore wouldn't be leaving soon. Outside, Raymond discovered that shovels found in the river were from Moore's landscaping. He was frustrated by how suspects often underestimate investigations. The detectives quickly presented their findings to the DA. Although they only had circumstantial evidence and no body, the DA agreed to file charges. Within 30 minutes, Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore were charged with Rick Dorsey's murder. Despite their protests, the case was now in the hands of the prosecution. Nora and Clyde were then taken to the police station for fingerprinting and booking photos. Clyde was visibly angry, while Nora, overwhelmed, struggled between crying and trying to smile. Afterward, they were led to adjacent holding cells where they finally had a chance to talk since the charges were filed. "What are we going to do, Clyde? They can't really believe we did something to Rick, can they?" Nora asked, still sniffling occasionally, but mostly past her tears. "It looks like we'll need to get lawyers," Clyde replied. "Unless you want to share one with me. That could save some money since we're both facing the same charges. This whole situation is messed up, though. I have a feeling Rick set us up. I suspect he might have paid someone to off him and then left clues to make it look like we did it." Clyde's anger was evident. "You can't seriously think he'd go that far, can you?" Nora responded, shocked and almost outraged by the idea. "Why would Rick go to the extreme of having himself killed?" "Nora, I don't think you really knew your husband as well as you thought," Clyde said. "I'm stunned that he didn't take drastic action the moment he found out about our affair. That's the real mystery. I've known Rick for too long to believe he'd just let it slide. If I had any idea he'd find out, I never would have gotten involved with you." He then recounted how he had previously gone behind Rick's back with one of his girlfriends. Now they were in separate holding cells, divided by a 6-inch concrete block wall. Despite the separation, they could easily and freely talk through the bars next to the wall. "I just don't think Rick would go that far," Nora said. "I have no idea how or when he found out. He never treated me any differently. Most of the time we were together, he was out of town, and we never went out in public. The few times we did meet while he was actually in town were at that small motel on the north side." After a pause, she added, "I should never have betrayed him. Even if he's not dead, he'll still want a divorce." Her voice cracked several times as she spoke, clearly emotional. Clyde listened to her sniffles before replying, "Come on, Nora. You had to know how this would end if he caught us. You were well aware of what you were getting into the first time you came to my place and ended up in my bed." His words had the intended impact, and her sniffles ceased. After a few moments, she quietly said, "You're right. I can only hope he'll forgive me." They remained silent for a few minutes until Nora suggested, "I could call Robert Graham. He was our lawyer. If he'll represent both of us, we can split the costs." They agreed on a legal plan, and soon after, an officer took Nora to a private room with a phone and phone book. She called Robert Graham, Rick's divorce attorney, who was uncomfortable representing her and suggested Basil Smith, a criminal lawyer. Nora agreed, and Smith was arranged to come over immediately. Clyde was relieved and thanked Nora for the call. They sat quietly on a bench in their holding cells while they waited. When Basil Smith arrived, they were taken to a room for lawyer-client meetings. Smith, a short, stocky man in a pinstriped suit, introduced himself and reviewed the charge documents. He asked Nora to explain what happened since Detective Raymond's visit. Nora, becoming emotional as she described the arrest and fingerprinting, insisted she was innocent and loved Rick, saying she could never harm him. After Nora spoke, Smith turned to Clyde, asking him to summarize. Clyde quickly recapped the events since the police arrived at his house, maintaining his composure. He stated, "Nora and I had nothing to do with Rick's disappearance. I believe Rick set this up himself, paid someone to end him, and arranged to frame us." He glared at Smith, daring him to disagree. Nora's reaction to Clyde's claim caused her to start crying again. Smith, focusing on practical matters, said, "We need to concentrate on your bail. Given the charges, I expect it will be about $100,000 each. Will this be a problem?" Nora looked alarmed and asked, I need $100,000 for bail. She was on the verge of panicking, knowing she didn't have that kind of money. No, Nora, you only need 10% of that, which is $10,000 in cash, to cover a $100,000 bail. The state doesn't require the full amount unless the judge specifically says so, her lawyer quickly clarified. With the situation explained, both Nora and Clyde believed raising bail would be straightforward and were eager to know if they could be bailed out immediately. However, their lawyer informed them that they would be arraigned the next morning, at which point bail would be set. Until then, they would spend the night in their holding cells, a prospect they found distressing. The lawyer said little could be done until the arraignment. He planned to meet with the DA to review the evidence and understand their situation. That night, Nora and Clyde struggled to sleep in their cells, enduring noisy cellmates and poor conditions. By their 10 a.m. court appearance the next day, they were exhausted. They pleaded not guilty, and bail was set at $100,000. Clyde posted $10,000 and was released by early afternoon. Nora, lacking funds and home ownership, needed her parents to cover the $10,000 shortfall. She spent another night in custody and was released by noon the next day. After returning home, she discovered Rick had withdrawn funds from their joint account 10 days before his disappearance. An email from Rick to his lawyer revealed he took the money to prevent Nora from claiming it in their divorce, but planned to return it after the settlement. Nora and Clyde met with their lawyer, Basil Smith, who believed the lack of a body or cross-examinable witness would complicate a conviction and aimed to have the charges dropped. Smith suggested hiring a private detective to investigate if Rick had staged his own disappearance. Clyde agreed, but Nora, still believing in a carjacking, was reluctant to accept the evidence suggesting Rick was likely dead. The private detective found no new information. Efforts to locate the tipster who reported the Colt and shovels and canvassing areas frequented by transients yielded no leads. The lack of follow-up from the tipster remained unexplained. Basil Smith noticed growing discord between Nora and Clyde. After their release, Clyde proposed continuing their relationship now that Rick was out of the picture. Nora firmly rejected him, expressing her sorrow over Rick's loss and ending in tears. Clyde's response was dismissive, leading to their communication being limited to interactions with their lawyer. Their once passionate affair had turned cold. Just over a month after their release, Basil Smith arranged a meeting with DA Jeff Bagden, hoping the charges would be dropped. Nora and Clyde were eager to move on from the persistent harassment they faced from crank callers and nosy acquaintances. They were surprised by DA Bagden's youthful appearance and casual demeanor. He began by announcing that, based on the final reports and evidence, he was offering a reduced sentence of 8 to 12 years in exchange for a guilty plea to second-degree murder. Nora and Clyde were shocked, loudly proclaiming their innocence while their lawyer questioned the DA's justification for the plea offer. Bagden presented new evidence. DNA from blood samples on Clyde Moore's car matched Rick Dorsey, and a scrap of black polyethylene found under Rick's car matched material from Moore's landscaping business. Nora, furious, demanded to know what Clyde had done. Clyde appeared stunned by the new information. Basil Smith quickly intervened, silencing Nora and taking note of the DA's evidence. Clyde reacted immediately to her accusation. He shouted, "I had nothing to do with this! You were with me in my bed when it happened!" Before he could say anything more, Basil grabbed his arm and firmly told him to be quiet. Turning to the DA, the lawyer said, "Jeff, please excuse my clients. We came here hoping the charges would be dropped, and your statement has clearly shocked them both." Jeff Bagden, slightly amused, informed Basil Smith that the evidence was sufficient for trial. The medical examiner's report showed Rick Dorsey had lost too much blood to be alive, and crime scene reports suggested a body was moved. Bagden handed over the evidence files and left. After the DA left, Nora and Clyde rushed to speak with their lawyer, Basil Smith, who had to calm them to get their statements straight. He advised them to focus on their defense and confirmed their decision to reject the plea deal of 8 to 12 years. Nora and Clyde firmly declined the plea deal, confident they could win at trial. Basil agreed to reject the offer and started preparing for the trial. Alone, he reviewed new reports and questioned his client's honesty, but remained committed to their defense. The trial of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore began on a Monday morning with Judge Robert Cox presiding. Defense attorney Basil Smith sat between the clients, managing their strained relationship. District Attorney Jeff Bagden delivered the opening statement, explaining that while Rick Dorsey's body was not found, the DA would prove he was dead and that Nora and Clyde were responsible. He detailed the affair between Nora and Clyde, Rick's divorce filing, and evidence from Rick's computer tracking the affair and divorce preparations. The prosecution claimed Rick was confronted, incapacitated, and taken to a remote location where he was murdered. Evidence included chest injury and a second shot to his carotid artery, with graphic blood evidence. Nora struggled to stay composed during the DA's presentation, but her lawyer calmed her after several warnings from Judge Cox. The DA described how Rick was wrapped in a plastic shroud, placed in Clyde's car trunk, and buried at an unknown location. The murder tool and shovels were found in the river due to a tip. Forensic evidence linked Nora and Clyde to the crime scene. Rick's blood was found on Clyde's car and Nora's shoes. The defense planned to argue their alibis, but the DA believed their testimonies wouldn't convince the jury. Basil Smith struggled to counter the DA's opening statement, arguing that the case against Nora and Clyde was circumstantial and that they were innocent until proven guilty. Despite his efforts, initial media coverage favored the DA. The first witness, a computer expert, detailed how emails and maps tracked Nora and Clyde's meetings, showing Rick used a tracking device to map these meetings. A reporter noted the technology for future coverage. Clyde seemed uninterested during the testimony, while Nora avoided eye contact and looked embarrassed. The tracking data and emails were verifiable, leaving little for Smith to challenge. After lunch, the trial continued with testimony from a 911 operator and patrol officers about discovering Rick's car. The detectives and forensic experts then provided detailed and graphic descriptions of the crime scene, including photos of bullet holes, blood, and drag ricks. The medical examiner estimated 3 to 4 pints of blood at the scene and detailed blood patterns, which visibly upset Nora, causing her to scream and break down. The judge adjourned court for the day. On the second day, the trial resumed at 10 a.m. with the medical examiner providing more details about blood tests. After 15 minutes of questioning by DA Jeff Bagdon, the witness was handed over to the defense. Defense attorney Basil Smith, checking that Nora was calm and under control, began his cross-examination. He aimed to challenge the medical examiner's graphic testimony by questioning the accuracy of the blood loss estimate. Smith suggested it might have been as low as 1 to 2 pints instead of the estimated 3 to 4 pints. The medical examiner, known for his thoroughness, paused before responding, "It's not very likely, but it's not impossible either." Basil Smith let the medical examiner's response settle with the jury, remaining silent for nearly a minute. He then asked, if someone had applied immediate first aid, the fatal wound to Rick Dorsey might not have been as deadly, correct? After a brief pause, the medical examiner replied, "My answer remains the same as before. It's not likely, but it's not impossible. Immediate medical care would have been necessary within minutes of such a wound. There's no evidence that this care was given." The defense attorney quickly added, "While there's no evidence that any help was provided, as you mentioned, it's still a possibility." He then dismissed the witness, pleased with the minor concessions he had achieved. The next witness, a firearms and ammunition forensics technician, detailed the recovery of 2 bullets, one from a car seat and one from a block of firewood. Both bullets were full metal jacket type, used for target shooting and military purposes. The bullet from the car seat was deformed after hitting a metal support, while the one from the firewood was in good condition and easily matched to the tool recovered from the river. Defense attorney Basil Smith asked if the bullets were tested for bone or flesh residue, which could indicate which organs they had hit. The technician confirmed that tests showed only traces of blood, with no significant residue from bone or flesh. The bullets' jackets, made of a harder copper-steel alloy, did not yield further insights. This testimony was a mixed bag for the defense. While it confirmed there was no direct evidence of the bullets passing through a body, the type of bullets used and their conditions still supported the prosecution's narrative. The Colt linked to the case was traced to a Colt show from 20 years ago, with no record of the purchaser. However, Basil Smith successfully highlighted that neither defendant's fingerprints nor DNA were found, suggesting they had been cleaned or washed away. A technician then testified about 2 shovels recovered from the scene. While no fingerprints or DNA were present, both shovels were stamped with Moore's Landscaping. An inspection of Moore's Landscaping found 14 more shovels with the same stamp, leaving no room for cross-examination. The morning and early afternoon were filled with testimonies from forensics experts and police. Smith cross-examined a technician who had found blood smears in Clyde Moore's car, questioning whether they could have been planted by someone else. The technician conceded that it was possible, which pleased Smith. In contrast, evidence from Nora Dorsey's home was harder to refute. Blood was found inside her car and on her shoe, making it difficult to argue that the blood was planted. Smith managed to get the technician to admit uncertainty about whether the blood transferred from the shoe to the gas pedal or vice versa. The defense hoped to cast doubt on the blood evidence against Nora Dorsey, which could sway the jury. As the prosecution's witnesses concluded their testimonies at the end of the afternoon session, the defense was set to begin their case the next morning. Local newspapers speculated that the defense would struggle against the prosecution's strong evidence, especially with no body present. The defense strategy seemed to focus on questioning Rick Dorsey's death. For the defense, Attorney Smith called Dr. Wilbur, a blood evidence expert. Dr. Wilbur criticized the medical examiner's work, suggesting that better analysis of the blood-soaked earth could have provided a more accurate blood volume estimate. The attorney asked, "From your review of the evidence, what is your opinion on the amount of blood at the scene?" Dr. Wilbur responded, "It's possible that as little as 1.5 pints of blood could have resulted in the scene shown in the photographs." The final question was, do you think someone who lost the amount of blood shown in the photos could have survived? Dr. Wilbur answered simply, yes. There was no cross-examination by the district attorney. After Dr. Wilbur was dismissed, Basil Smith moved on to the testimony of Clyde Moore. Clyde spoke calmly and clearly, asserting that he was not guilty of Rick Dorsey murder and suggesting that Rick might have orchestrated his own death. He also stated that he had never owned a tool and that the shovels found in the river could have been taken from one of his company's job sites. Basil Smith aimed to keep the testimony straightforward and quickly handed over the witness for cross-examination by the prosecutor. Jeff Bagdon's first question was, "Why do you believe Rick Dorsey would have planned his own murder?" Clyde Moore quickly recounted how Rick had reacted in high school when Clyde dated Rick's girlfriend behind his back. He explained that Rick had threatened him with violence, showing his potential for aggressive behavior. The prosecutor took a moment to consider this and then asked, "So, Mr. Moore, this isn't the first time you've gotten involved with a woman Rick Dorsey would expect to be off limits due to your friendship. Don't you think that if Rick wanted someone dead, he would have targeted you?" Clyde Moore couldn't directly answer the question, and instead argued that his physical advantage over Rick would have prevented Rick from confronting him directly. The prosecutor pressed further. "So you believe you could intimidate your best friend into having someone killed by proxy? Is that why you felt secure in pursuing his wife? Are your actions those of a true friend?" "No need to answer, sir. It's clear that your behavior reflects a self-centered playboy who disregards both friendship and loyalty." Basil objected to the district attorney's statement, arguing that the DA was giving testimony instead of asking questions. The judge instructed the jury to disregard the DA's comment, but it didn't change the impact of the statement. Clyde, visibly upset, left the stand without further comment. Basil hoped that Nora Dorsey's testimony would improve their case. Clyde's testimony and the prosecutor's questions had made him look bad, but Basil hoped it hadn't negatively affected Nora's credibility. Nora took the stand, maintaining her composure. She denied any involvement in harming her husband and expressed her love for him. When asked about the incident, she speculated that her husband might have been carjacked. Basil chose not to question her further. The prosecutor began his cross-examination with, "Can you account for your whereabouts from midnight Saturday, when your husband sent his last email, until 2 p.m. Sunday?" Nora felt uneasy about the question and replied, "I told Mr. Smith I was with Clyde Moore at his home from 8 o'clock on Saturday night until about 1:30 on Sunday afternoon." The prosecutor pressed for more detail, saying, "You haven't really answered the question. Could you provide a detailed account of what you did from midnight Saturday until you got home on Sunday?" Nora appeared flustered and uncomfortable. She finally said, "At midnight, I was in Clyde's bedroom and we were, having closeness." The prosecutor kept prompting her to continue despite her hesitation. "How long did this last?" the prosecutor asked, waiting for her response. "Well, we went to sleep at around 1 o'clock. It might have been a bit later," Nora answered, still visibly uneasy. "So, from midnight until about 1 o'clock, you and Clyde had closeness and then went to sleep. What happened next? Please continue with your timeline." Nora hesitated before responding. "We slept until about 5:45. I remember getting up to use the bathroom." The DA asked, "Was Mr. Moore still in bed when you woke up? Please go on." "Yes, he was there. We, had closeness again and went back to sleep around 6:30, then got up around 11 in the morning." Her response sped up as she seemed eager to finish her statement. "To confirm, when you returned from the bathroom, Mr. Moore initiated closeness, which continued until about 6:30 a.m., after which you both went back to sleep. Is that correct?" Did that happen exactly as you described? Nora, clearly uncomfortable, admitted, Actually, that's not entirely accurate. I didn't wake him up by shaking him. I had to wake him up. Surprised by her response, the DA quickly asked, So you woke him up. Did you do it by shaking his shoulder, or did you wake him up to ask him for closeness? Embarrassed, Nora replied, No, I didn't wake him up that way. I was doing BJ until he was ready. And then he woke up. Her voice was barely audible as she gave this answer. Noticing that the female jurors appeared upset, the DA pressed on. If you didn't wake him up by shaking him, and if BJ didn't wake him, how exactly did you get him to wake up? Nora, resigned to continue despite her lawyer's failed objections, said, I just started having closeness with him, and that's when he woke up. She was deeply embarrassed, turning her head away from the jurors, contrary to her lawyer's advice to make eye contact to show sincerity. Jeff Bagden seized the opportunity for a final question. Earlier, you told your attorney that you love your husband. Is that right? Nora nodded vigorously and responded with a firm yes. Then he said, I'm a bit confused. You claim to love your husband, but you just described spending the night he was ended in bed with his best friend, having closeness and showing no concern for him. How can we believe you weren't involved in his murder? Nora, tearful and hiding her face, didn't answer the prosecutor's last question. Judge Cox eventually ended the session and announced a lunch break. After regaining her composure, Nora joined her lawyer and co-defendant for a somber lunch. Basil Smith warned them that the case could go either way, feeling pessimistic due to their poor performance on the stand. The afternoon session concluded quickly, with no additional defense witnesses. Closing statements were delivered. The prosecutor argued the evidence was overwhelming, while the defense highlighted the circumstantial nature of the case, the missing body, and the lack of motive. The jury began deliberations by 4 p.m. and adjourned for the night. The next morning, Nora, Clyde, and Basil waited anxiously in his office for the jury's verdict. While waiting, Nora and Clyde set aside their differences, discussing their chances of acquittal. At 3:30 p.m., they received the verdict. Nora's parents visited town for the trial but didn't attend the courthouse, sparing them from hearing her testimony. They stayed in touch with the court and were present when the jury's decision was announced. Nora was grateful for their support as she faced the verdict. The verdict was read quickly. Nora and Clyde were found guilty of second-degree murder. Shocked and devastated, Nora broke down in tears while Clyde pounded the table in frustration. They were handcuffed and taken into custody, given a brief moment to speak to their families. They were informed they would return in a week for sentencing. During the week between conviction and sentencing, Nora's parents visited her daily, while Clyde had one visit from a cousin. Clyde struggled with the reality of his situation while Nora remained in denial. Sentencing was swift. Both received 15 years to life. Basil Smith promised to review the case for an appeal. Within 3 days, Nora and Clyde were transferred to state prison. Nora was sent to a reasonably reputable women's prison, while Clyde was assigned to a troubled facility known for disturbances. After the trial and sentencing of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore, the case quickly faded from local news, overshadowed by new events and crimes. The last coverage showed prisoners being transported to state prison, and then the media moved on. A few months later, Basil Smith and District Attorney Jeff Bagden met for drinks. Basil admitted he was surprised by the convictions, noting that the defendants' consistent stories had led him to believe they were likely innocent. Jeff noted that despite their claims, the jury didn't believe them, and while he found the case troubling, he had to accept the jury's verdict. About a year later, Basil saw a news article about a riot at the men's prison where Clyde Moore was held. Clyde had been stabbed and was in guarded condition, but would survive. This news reminded Basil of the case, which had troubled him for the first year after the trial. Despite thoroughly reviewing the case transcripts, he found no legal grounds for an appeal. On a quiet Wednesday morning at the Innocence Project in New York City, the receptionist received a large FedEx package. After signing for it, she opened the envelope to find a DVD, a sealed biohazard bag, and a multi-page letter. The letter seemed to deeply affect her, showing a range of emotions. Once she finished reading, she called Tony via intercom, saying, "Tony, could you come out here? We've got a package that I think will interest you. It seems to involve some murder convictions that might need to be revisited." A minute later, Tony Kelly, a tall, red-haired young lawyer in a short-sleeved shirt and jeans, emerged from his office, thanked the receptionist, and took the package. Tony had recently graduated and was working at the Innocence Project before moving on to a high-paying Wall Street firm. He enjoyed making a difference for those wrongly convicted, even though he knew his time there was limited. Back at his desk, Tony placed the package's contents, a letter, a DVD, and a sealed bag on his blotter. Settling into his chair, he propped his feet on the desk and began reading the letter, which was clearly printed and drew him in immediately. Murder convictions of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore. I'll start from the beginning to ensure everything is clear and nothing important is missed. My identity isn't relevant, but the information I'm providing could significantly impact Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore, as well as affect the lives of 5 others, including myself. About 15 months ago, I placed an ad looking for a computer expert to join my small computer services company. I hired a man, whom I'll refer to as Rick, after a brief interview showed he was highly skilled and knowledgeable. Rick proved to be an exceptional worker, contributing to a 50% growth in my business within 2 months due to his expertise and dedication. When Rick started working for me, he mentioned he had just moved to town and hadn't found a place to live. I was considering renting out a basement room in my home for extra income as my business was still growing. Despite the risk, I rented the room to Rick, feeling he wouldn't pose a threat to us. Rick lived in the basement for 3 months, but we soon grew close. He joined us for meals and commuted to work with me. His dedication was evident as he often worked extra hours without pay, preferring productivity over leisure. Our relationship evolved from boss-employee to close friends and eventually to a loving family. My son now calls him Daddy. Despite his quiet demeanor, Rick eventually confided in me about his troubled past. He revealed he was escaping a traumatic marriage where his wife had betrayed him with a friend. This almost drove him to murder and self-ending. We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing our experiences with infidelity. My husband had left me for another woman, and Rick had left his wife due to her affair. This common ground helped us bond and led to us dating on weekends, while keeping our professional relationship during the week. After a month, Rick moved from the basement into my bedroom and we became a family. Rick has been a loving partner and father to my son, who is almost 4. His biological father has been absent since infancy. 4 days ago, Rick collapsed at work and was diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery. After stabilizing, he was moved to a private room. When I first saw him, he seemed deeply troubled. Rick then shared a story he felt needed to be told before his surgery, as it was important for him to resolve this chapter of his life. He shared his story with me this afternoon, and once I agreed to type it up and ensure it reached you, he seemed relieved. Now he's asleep while our son rests beside him. I plan to finish this letter tonight and create the DVD, which I'll explain later. I also need to gather a few more items before sending everything to you by noon tomorrow. I'll ensure it's sent from a location that won't trace back to us. Rick's story began nearly 2 years ago. He was happily married to Nora, nearing their 6th anniversary. One night after they had made love, Nora fell asleep without clothes beside him. Rick noticed a small bruise on her right breast. Initially, he thought it might be from an accident at home or work, but the bruise looked more like a love bite. It bothered him, especially since he hadn't caused it, and he couldn't stop thinking about it the next day at work. By the time Rick reached his office, he felt he was being unreasonable, as he had no proof of any wrongdoing. Just before lunch, his manager gave him a tracking device to test for their delivery fleet. Rick decided to install it in Nora's car. 3 days later, he checked the tracker and saw that Nora had gone to Clyde Moore's house instead of shopping, as she had claimed. Despite calling Nora, who stuck to her shopping story, Rick decided to continue monitoring her. Over the next week, while he was away on business, he tracked her car to Clyde's house from evening until early morning. When Nora said she had been home all night, Rick was devastated by the confirmation of her infidelity. When Rick returned from his trip, he was devastated by his wife's betrayal and contemplated revenge. Knowing Clyde's reputation as a ladies' man, Rick was shocked to find out he was involved with Nora. On his first night back, Rick visited the elderly widow next door to borrow a wrench, but instead took a hidden Colt from her late husband's toolbox. He intended to use it to end Nora and Clyde, then himself. He planned to catch them together before executing his revenge. While waiting for the opportunity, Rick decided to frame them for murder. He spent 2 weeks devising and gathering everything for his plan. Confident that Nora and Clyde would meet during his next business trip, he set his plan into motion when he saw her leave for Clyde's house. Rick created a paper trail to make it look like he was divorcing Nora and almost forgot to send an incriminating email to his lawyer that would implicate Nora and Clyde. Before leaving, he fired into his car's passenger seat and a block of wood using his neighbor's Colt, muffling the sound with an old blanket in his garage. This was a key step in his revenge plan. He closely followed the trial online, and the court reporters covered most of his actions. For a full understanding, check the archived newspaper articles and trial transcripts. Rick set up his plan in a park near Clyde's home, using a gym bag full of evidence and a picnic table covered with a blanket. Rick started by setting up a drag rick with firewood, plastic sheeting, and a spare tire to lead to the road. He returned the tire to the trunk, placed the wood around the picnic site, and packed away the plastic. Using a small maglite, he worked in the dark, worried about being seen. He then collected nearly 2 pints of his own blood, using a needle and medical supplies he bought under the pretense of caring for his elderly mother. After diluting the blood with distilled water, he used it to create a scene that suggested a violent struggle. He squirted blood in a pattern to mimic arterial spray, spread more around the car seat and ground, and poured it into bullet holes in the firewood and passenger seat. I hope I've captured the details accurately, as I don't want to disturb him before his surgery tomorrow. I'm hoping for a smooth procedure and his recovery. Rick planned to make a DVD documenting his actions. He took before and after photos of his setup in the park, including pictures of himself drawing blood. He's given me the password to access these photos on our work server, where they've been stored as his souvenirs. After finishing his setup with the blood in the park, Rick packed up and drove an old car he had for this purpose. He felt lightheaded from blood loss, but rested in the car until early morning. He then went to Clyde's house, found Nora's car unlocked, and added a few drops of blood to her accelerator pedal. He also spread some blood on Clyde's car before quickly leaving. Rick used a payphone to report his car in the park, disguising his voice with a professional phone changer. He then disposed of Clyde's shovels and the Colt in the river. By the end of this, he was exhausted but relieved that his plan seemed to have worked. Rick rented a room at a nearby motel where he rested and took supplements for 2 days. At some point, he used his voice changer to call the police and direct them to the Colt he had discarded. He told me this story so I could help him sever his ties to his former identity as Rick Dorsey. He wants to keep his current identity and never return to his old life. Please work to reverse the convictions of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore. Tomorrow, I'll get a copy of the New York Times and an ink pad. We'll use the front page for Rick's fingerprints and create a large blood stain to match the DNA from the park. This should prove Rick is alive and help free them from prison. The letter ended with a handwritten note. Rick's surgery went well. I need to fly to Seattle tomorrow to send this package. I hate to leave him, but he'll feel better once it's sent. By the way, Rick and I are expecting twins in 3 months. Tony Kelly checked for any additional notes and then reviewed the items in the package. The DVD was labeled Photos Taken in George Washington Park, and the plastic envelope was Rick, fingerprints, and DNA. After confirming with senior lawyers, the DNA and fingerprints matched Rick Dorsey, proving he was alive. This evidence led the state attorney general and governor to expedite the release of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore. Within a week, they were back in court, joined by Basil Smith, Nora's parents, and District Attorney Jeff Bagden. The state attorney general apologized for the wrongful convictions of Nora Dorsey and Clyde Moore, attributing the blame to Rick Dorsey. He announced that efforts would be made to find and hold Rick accountable for the costs incurred by the city and state, including police, forensics, trial, and prison expenses. However, he admitted they had no leads on Rick's whereabouts. Clyde Moore, once arrogant, now showed remorse and apologized to Nora for the ordeal. Nora appeared indifferent, eager to leave the courthouse with her parents. Both Basil Smith and the district attorney also apologized, acknowledging they had been misled by Rick Dorsey and vowing to be more vigilant in the future. Though the state claimed no liability, Nora and Clyde each received $50,000 in compensation in exchange for waiving further legal claims. Clyde soon left town, having lost his business and home to cover his legal fees. After receiving their checks, Clyde commented to Nora, "Rick really screwed us. This check is just a fraction of what we lost. I knew he set us up." Nora, now a shadow of her former self, had lost their home and weight in prison. Her face was etched with worry lines. Accepting the check with indifference, she said, "Maybe we deserved this. I lost 18 months, but Rick is gone forever." She then left with her parents without saying goodbye. 2 weeks after Nora and Clyde were released, attorney Basil Smith delivered a letter addressed to Nora Dorsey. At 5 p.m., he knocked on Nora's door. After a brief conversation, he left her with the envelope, which she opened in her kitchen. The letter was from Rick. "Nora, I'm sorry for the time you spent in prison. Betrayal by you and Clyde drove me mad. My new life and happiness have made me realize I was just as much a prisoner as you were. Though the authorities will search for me, I'm safe with my new family. Good luck, and goodbye. The letter fell from her hand, extinguishing any remaining hope for reconciliation with Rick.